This is the news in brief from the United Nations. As the Omicron variant of COVID-19 continues to surge across the world, the UN Health Agency on Tuesday said that it was crucial that more is done to help all countries receive life-saving coronavirus jabs as quickly as possible. The development comes as the World Health Organization, WHO, insisted that countries could not boost their way out of the pandemic. Before the holiday period, 128 countries reported that they had identified Omicron, the WHO said, during a scheduled press briefing in Geneva. WHO epidemiologist Dr. Abdi Mahamoud told journalists that there is still not enough data available to say whether the Omicron variant was less severe than other coronavirus strains. He noted that in London, which has been hit very hard by spiking numbers of COVID infections, hospitalisation rates were more than 20% lower now than they had been in 2020, before vaccinations were available.
So the main message, if you are vaccinated, you are protected, but if you are vulnerable or you have not been vaccinated, this Omicron, however light or mild may be to others, it will hit very hard. So vaccination, very critical.
Without the protection of a vaccine, the virus replicates in an environment that's overcrowded, not ventilated and not vaccinated, said Dr. Mahamoud, who insisted that it was in the global interest to vaccinate 70% of national populations. P5 is the term used to describe the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, Britain, China, France, Russia and the United States, and their joint statement issued on Monday on the prevention of nuclear war and arms races has been welcomed by UN Chief Antonio Guterres. The development follows a warning from the Secretary-General at the end of last year over the grave danger posed by the 13,000 nuclear weapons currently believed to be held by a handful of countries. This threat is growing by the year, the UN chief said, adding that nuclear annihilation was just one misunderstanding or miscalculation away. The UN leads global efforts to eliminate weapons of mass destruction through the Treaty of the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, or NPT. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, an NPT review that was due to begin on Tuesday has been postponed until August. Mr. Guterres insisted that the treaty remains our main hope to reverse the global arms race. A devastating fire has ripped through a COVID-19 treatment centre for Myanmar refugees sheltering in Bangladesh, the UN Migration Agency IOM has said. In a tweet, IOM said that no one was hurt at the health facility in Cox's Bazar camp complex after the blaze broke out suddenly on Sunday evening. Pictures posted on social media showed charred metal bed frames and workers clearing away piles of ash at the Isolation and Treatment Centre for people with severe acute respiratory infections. Despite the damage, health services are expected to resume soon, IOM said, while assessment teams continue their work to assist those in need. They include many hundreds of thousands of Rohingya refugees who fled neighbouring Myanmar after a military campaign in 2017 that a former UN rights chief likened to textbook ethnic cleansing. Daniel Johnson, UN News. This is the news in brief from the United Nations. The killing of journalist Sai Win-aung in Myanmar has been condemned by the UN's Cultural, Scientific and Educational Organisation, UNESCO. It said that the reporter, who was also known as Aung San Suu Kyi, died on the 25th of December while covering the plight of refugees in the southeastern state of Kayin for the Federal News Journal. He was fatally shot in an artillery attack by the Myanmar Armed Forces, UNESCO said, citing reports, making him the second journalist to be killed in Myanmar last month. Appealing for a full investigation into Mr. Aung's death, UNESCO head Audrey Azoulay said that media workers like Sai Win-aung risked their lives to keep the public informed and that they deserve to be protected in line with international humanitarian law. In Afghanistan, harsh winter conditions are aggravating the severe crisis facing millions across the country. That's the warning from UN Aid Coordination Office OCHA, which said that heavy snowfall and rain have already disrupted flights to and from Kabul airport, just as forecasts have indicated further snow in coming days. The humanitarian situation in Afghanistan was bad even before the Taliban takeover last August, but it has been made worse by the subsequent suspension of aid to the country and the freezing of Afghanistan's assets by many countries and international organisations. According to UN humanitarians, more than 24 million Afghans are expected to need assistance this year, and more than 9 in 10 of them are likely to be acutely food insecure by March. To northwest Syria now, where 2 children have been killed and 5 others injured in violence linked to the long-running conflict since the start of the year. The news, reported on Tuesday by UN Children's Fund UNICEF, came as it condemned an attack on a water station in Ashani village outside Idlib, which cut the supply to more than 240,000 people. Children and services catering to them must never come under attack, UNICEF said in a statement. In an earlier declaration, the UN's Deputy Regional Humanitarian Coordinator for Syria, Mark Cutts, tweeted that in northwestern Syria airstrikes were continuing and that more civilians were being killed in Idlib. The northwestern region is the last opposition-held enclave in Syria and home to some 2.8 million people who've been displaced by nearly 11 years of war. Daniel Johnson, UN News. This is the news in brief from the United Nations. 55 journalists and media professionals were killed last year, the UN said on Thursday, adding that nearly 9 in 10 killings since 2006 are still unresolved. Impunity is alarmingly widespread, said the UN Scientific, Education and Cultural Organization, UNESCO. Although the numbers of victims is the lowest in a decade, UNESCO pointed to the many dangers that reporters face. These include high rates of imprisonment, physical attack, intimidation and harassment, including when covering protests. Women journalists also face a shocking prevalence of online abuse linked to their work, UNESCO said. 2/3 of the victims died in countries not in the grip of armed conflict, which the agency said highlighted the continued dangers faced by journalists in their daily reporting. Here's UNESCO's Claire O'Hagan.
As our Director General Audrey Azoulay said, once again in 2021, far too many journalists paid the ultimate price to bring truth to light. Right now, the world needs independent, factual information more than ever. We must do more to ensure that those who work tirelessly to provide this can do so without fear.
Most deaths take place in just 2 regions, Asia Pacific with 23 killings and Latin America and the Caribbean with 14. The arrest and detention of more than 24 union leaders and activists representing striking casino workers in Cambodia has been met with concern by UN-appointed independent experts. Video footage showed many arrests being conducted in a violent way, which could contravene freedoms of association, assembly and expression, said the rights experts, including Vitit Muntabhorn, UN Special Rapporteur on Cambodia. He and 3 other experts appointed by the Human Rights Council explained that the strike began on the 31st of December in response to the dismissal of 365 staff at Naga World Casino and Resort. They'd been in negotiations with their employer, the Ministry of Labour and Vocational Training, and Phnom Penh municipal authorities. So far, 7 women and 2 men have been charged with incitement to commit a felony under the Cambodian Penal Code and remain in custody while the others have been released. These are the same provisions that have been used to prosecute human rights defenders in the country, the rights experts said on Wednesday, warning that the arrests appear to be an escalation in tactics by security forces. As inflation pushes up grocery shopping costs across the world, new UN data released on Thursday confirmed that average prices in 2021 were a massive 28% higher than the previous 12 months. In its latest update, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization FAO said that there was little room for optimism that prices might stabilize this year because of high input costs, COVID-19 and ever more uncertain climatic conditions. The agency's Food Price Index, which tracks changes in the international prices of commonly traded foods, showed that cereals reached their highest level since 2012. Other essentials like cooking oil increased more than 65% compared with 2020, and sugar rose almost 30% over the same period, which is its highest level since 2016. Over the course of 2021, meat prices were around 13% higher than in 2020, while dairy products averaged nearly 17% higher than the previous 12 months. Daniel Johnson, UN News. This is the news in brief from the United Nations. Super Typhoon Rai, which ripped through the Philippines over Christmas, has created a massive emergency with huge and ongoing needs, UN humanitarians said on Friday. Communities are still reeling from the effects of the typhoon, which made landfall in no less than 9 places across an area the size of Austria and killed some 500 people. It is being compared to Typhoon Haiyan in 2013, which killed more than 6,000 and left 4 million homeless. Here's Brenda Barton from the World Food Programme, WFP, describing the devastation that humanitarians have encountered.
It just ripped across an area that is enormous, just really razing things to the ground, houses to the ground. The area that I saw, there was no building that was untouched, no house without a roof. by all houses without roofs. And it was heartbreaking because it was on Christmas Eve when the Filipino community comes together and celebrates Christmas and goes to Christmas Mass.
To support the relief effort, the UN has launched a $107 million appeal. WFP has requested $25 million of this for food, logistics and telecoms. To date, however, the agency has received $4.7 million, 3 weeks since the crisis began. The Omicron COVID variant should not be considered mild, and it is still killing people. That's the stark message from the World Health Organization, WHO, after the highest weekly number of coronavirus infections yet recorded. In a press conference from Geneva, WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus repeated his call for vaccine equity, as people who have been vaccinated have the best protection from all forms of the virus. Ahead of the Winter Games in China next month, the UN Health Agency also said that it saw no particular extra COVID risk associated with holding them, despite recent outbreaks in the country. Here's the WHO's Health Emergencies Executive Director, Dr. Mike Ryan.
China has been experiencing some pretty large outbreaks of coronavirus, or COVID-19, over the last number of weeks, and you'll see that the authorities in China are taking a very strong approach to dealing with those outbreaks. So we will continue to monitor the situation, but certainly at this stage, given the arrangements that have been put in place for the athletes and by the organisers, we don't perceive that there's any particular extra risk in hosting or running the games.
Amid reports of deadly violence linked to protests in Kazakhstan, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Michelle Bachelet has issued an appeal for security forces, demonstrators and others to refrain from violence. All those with grievances should seek a peaceful resolution to the emergency, Ms Bachelet said on Thursday evening. Her comments came after police in the main city of Almaty said that security forces had killed dozens of protesters, as media reports described intense shooting between the military and armed individuals in front of the city hall. Hundreds have reportedly been injured in the protests, which began on the 2nd of January after now reversed fuel price hikes. In a statement, the UN rights chief said that international law was clear. People have the right to peaceful protest. But she added that no one, no matter how angry or aggrieved they may be, should resort to violence against others. Daniel Johnson, UN News.